Who would you be if stress was no longer your default state? Who would you become? If worry was no longer familiar, who would you be? If your emotional home was gratitude instead of fear, most people never ask these questions because most people assume emotions simply happen. They believe emotions are reactions, responses to life, consequences of circumstances. But what if emotions are also habits? And what if habits can change? Now think about the idea of a baseline. A baseline is your normal, your default setting, the emotional state you return to most often. Some people return to worry, some people return to frustration, some return to guilt, some return to anger, some return to self-doubt, even when life is going well, even when nothing is wrong. The body finds its familiar emotional home. Now imagine a thermostat. No matter how much the temperature changes, the thermostat keeps bringing the room back to its programmed setting. Many people live the same way emotionally. A brief moment of happiness appears, then the system returns to worry. A moment of confidence appears, then the system returns to doubt. A moment of peace appears, then the system returns to stress. Not because life forced it, but because the emotional thermostat is still programmed there. Now here is the important question. Who programmed it? Life experiences, childhood, relationships, successes, failures, traumas, repeated emotional rehearsals. Every experience helped teach the body what was familiar. And over time, familiar becomes normal. Now understand this carefully. The body does not ask, is this emotional state good for me? The body asks, is this emotional state familiar? Because familiarity feels safe, even when it creates suffering. Now this explains why change can feel uncomfortable. Not because change is wrong, but because unfamiliar emotions feel strange. Imagine someone who has spent 20 years worrying, then suddenly begins practicing trust. The body may resist, not because trust is dangerous, but because trust is unfamiliar. Now imagine someone who has spent years criticizing themselves, then begin practicing self-compassion. Again, the body resists, not because compassion is harmful, but because compassion feels new. Now here is the encouraging truth. Every emotional baseline was learned, and whatever is learned can be relearned. Now think about learning a new language. At first, every word feels unnatural, awkward, difficult. You must think consciously, but eventually the language becomes familiar, natural, automatic. The same thing happens emotionally. At first, gratitude feels intentional. At first, appreciation feels intentional. At first, compassion feels intentional. But repetition changes everything. The nervous system learns. The body learns. The identity learns. Now, let us talk about identity. Most people think identity is who they are, but identity is often who they have repeatedly practiced being. The person who says, I am anxious, may actually mean I have practiced anxiety for years. The person who says I am stressed may actually mean my body has become familiar with stress. The person who says I am not confident may simply be describing an emotional pattern that has been rehearsed repeatedly. Now imagine something revolutionary. Imagine building a heart-centered identity. An identity rooted not in fear but in coherence, not in survival but in connection, not in scarcity, but in appreciation. Now the emotional baseline begins shifting. Slowly, gradually, naturally. The body starts returning to different states. Gratitude becomes easier, patience becomes easier, trust becomes easier, presence becomes easier. And eventually, the new emotional state feels more familiar than the old one. Now the thermostat has changed. Now the emotional home has changed. Now identity begins changing, because identity is not merely what you think about yourself. Identity is the emotional state you repeatedly live in. Now imagine waking up every day and asking, what emotional state am I teaching my body today? Fear or trust? Stress or coherence? Resentment or appreciation? Because every day you are practicing something, and whatever you practice becomes easier. Whatever becomes easier becomes familiar, and whatever becomes familiar becomes identity. Now, perhaps creating a new emotional baseline is not about becoming someone else. Perhaps it is about remembering who you are beneath the conditioning, beneath the survival patterns, beneath the emotional habits, beneath the old rehearsals. Because somewhere beneath all that noise, there is already a coherent self, a connected self, a heart-centered self. And every moment of gratitude, every moment of compassion, every moment of appreciation brings you a little closer to becoming familiar with that person again. Because transformation is not created in a single moment. Transformation is created when a new emotional state becomes your new normal. And when that happens, your future no longer feels like a dream. It begins feeling like who you are.